All right. Well, welcome back to Always on the Hunt. Today's guest is Brandy Alvarado Miranda, founder and CEO of BAM Marketing and PR, a creative leader in the Pro AV and digital signage space. She's also co-founder of WAVIT and former chair of the VIXO Women's Council. She is a true force in marketing, mentorship, and inclusion in the AV industry. With all that being said, Brandy, welcome to Always on the Hunt.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely, definitely been wanting to get you on this on the show. You and I haven't really spoke much in the past, but like I've always known what you've done and what you do for our industry. So wanted to get on this episode and kind of highlight your contribution and your impact that you've been making.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
So let's start from the beginning. Like how you got into the AV space back in 2014, right? In a marketing role. Why don't you tell the listeners who might not know you, tell them a little bit more about your background?
Yeah, marketing's kind of funny because you can work for pretty much any company as a marketer, and it's applicable everywhere, right? So prior to getting into AV, I worked in probably the most boring sector of insurance for 14 years. And my company that I worked for at that time, I was the director of sales and marketing. We'd done rebranding, we'd redone our website, a full marketing kind of like reboot, sales collateral. And with a big, strong emphasis on like sales and marketing kind of melding together, so that there were processes and procedures put into place for that kind of thing. So coming into AV, I had a lot of, marketing props, so to speak. And I kind of got stalked into it, to be honest. It's kind of a weird situation. So the company that I was working for at the time had gone through a pretty nasty merger and acquisition. And I was part of the team that helped, facilitate the merger. And but it didn't end well. We ended up losing more than half of our staff after the acquisition, and pretty much the writing was on the wall that I needed to move on, essentially, because they had a huge marketing department come in. So I didn't have like an open to work or anything like that on, but what did happen was the company that I ended up working for, they reached out to me on LinkedIn and they said, "Hey, we saw what you've done with this rebrand, and that's really, really cool. Would you be interested in talking to us?" And at the time I said, "Yeah, I'd love to." And timing didn't connect right away, which was kind of funny. And then like fast forward another couple of months, things had gotten really ugly with the merger and everything. And they reached out again and said, we're ready to kind of make this move now. We'd love to talk to you. And I said, okay. So I came in and interviewed, and that was all she wrote. I knew nothing about AV. I knew nothing about the industry. I had zero knowledge, totally wet behind the ears, And they actually plunked me into Infocom. I was at this company for 2 weeks, and I had my first Infocom 2 weeks after I started. So imagine, right?
Yeah. Talk about being thrown into the deep end, right? Like, hey, welcome to the industry. Go to Infocom,
Yeah,
right?
sink or swim. It's literally like that, right?
Yeah.
But I can tread water pretty well. So I will, I'll give myself a little toot of my horn. So, but I remember being in that booth because they were a manufacturer and they were exhibiting at Infocom. And I remember being in that booth and literally looking around the floor going, why are there so many men? I don't see any women here.
Right.
And, to my lack of knowledge, I learned pretty quick, that I was pretty much in the minority group at that point, right? So that was kind of one of the big factors for me getting into the industry. Was I thought, there's no women here? Well, that's going to change.
Right.
That attitude. So I made friends with Corey Schaefer almost immediately when I got into the industry, and we were collaborating on some projects with my manufacturer that I was working for. And it was after Infocom, she came to me and she says, "Doesn't it really stink that we only have like a breakfast a year for, the women in our industry, and that's all we really have going?" And I thought, you're kind of right. We have this like really great breakfast, and the breakfasts are always so amazing, and we leave on such a high and then just, nosedive. And so she and I got to talking, and she's like, "We should do like a networking thing locally." And we did. And that's kind of the onset of what happened for the VIXO Women's Council groups. We started a local group in Southern California, and it just snowballed. And then a couple of years later, I became the chair, and did my 3 years as the Women's Council chair. And then I'll help you and I'll segue into why WAVIT and how WAVIT was formed. So
Right.
I'm sure that's probably one of your next questions. But essentially, I was, my chair was like throughout COVID, and that was obviously a really tough time for the industry, for women in the industry, especially losing jobs, having to stay home with family and, do the whole work from home and school from home and all that kind of stuff. And group of girls and I got on one of these Zoom chats, these COVID, kind of quarantine, Zoom kind of things. And we started talking after we had, finished my chair term with the council. And they said, it's kind of strange, like the mission's not done. We're not done making an impact at this point.
Yeah.
And over like quarantinis, as I call it, we kind of like started this thought that we should have an association or a group, and that's how we conceive WAVIT, because we would just all really thought, well, we're not done making an impact, and what are we going to do? You know, um,
Well, right. You guys definitely making an impact, but the work's never done, right? The AV industry, right? You kind of jump in, like you said, you're working for a manufacturer, you're joining these councils and starting these important organizations. What about the AV industry once you got there? Did you like, you know,
you
I-
know, I've always been a nerd. It's kind of funny because I grew up playing music and listening to music. I was always really into like being in band and orchestras and all that kind of stuff. So feel like that's a huge thing that we all have in common. We are either, we've got some sort of musical chops, right?
Mhm.
And then I really felt at home. I felt like these are my people. Like we had a
Right,
lot in common with everybody in the industry, yeah, I really felt like I felt home. I can't see myself doing anything else.
right. A lot more fun than insurance, right?
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Yeah. So you're talking about COVID, and the Zoom happy hours and the quarantinis and stuff like that. So then you come up with another idea. You're like, I think I'm gonna launch my own agency, right? In the middle of a
I
pandemic.
did. Yeah. So I was working for, so I transitioned from manufacturer to an AV integrator. And this AV integrator that I worked for was only doing stuff in like theme parks and museums. So imagine those were like the first things to kind of get shut down and shuttered during COVID. So um, I got laid off, like many people at that time, and I thought, well, what am I going to do? I wanted to stay in AV,
Yeah.
and so I put up my open to work on LinkedIn, like everybody at the time, and almost immediately, because I had made so many great contacts and I networked. My network was really vast at that point, from being in the council, from being in these positions, that almost immediately got people reaching out saying, "Can you write this blog? I need you to help me with a case study. Can you do my social media?" All these little freelance projects, and I thought, well, that's really great in the interim until I find my next big thing.
Right.
But next big thing really never materialized. Timing wise, it just couldn't have been any worse.
Right.
My mentor, Hal Truax, and I got to talking, and he was one of the first ones that sort of like started throwing, projects at me that he needed help with. And we were talking one day, and he says, this is a business. You should start a business. And I was like, no, I don't want to do that. I'm going to just work for somebody, and this is fine for now. And he
Right.
kept pushing as a great mentor will. And he's like, Brand, this is a business. You need to really consider starting an agency because, you've got enough work that it is literally.
Right. It's a full-time job right
It really was. And so that's kind of like he pushed me over the edge again. I guess I'm used to treading water.
there. Yeah.
Might be a thing, right? Sounds
Right.
like a historical like thing in my career. But yeah, he literally kind of threw me off the end as well. And I'm really grateful for that push because that's how it was conceived.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I have a similar story because I started my company in the beginning of 2022, right? So shortly
Yeah.
after, and it was kind of the same thing. You're sitting around, you're working from home, and Yeah, I'm just like it's time to go off on my own, and luckily, you make enough good connections, good relationships, and all of a sudden you find yourself busy day one. So it was pretty awesome.
Yeah. I think, for me, I've always considered myself a connector, if that makes sense. I love introducing people. I love connecting people, and I do it often and into fault. I think sometimes, I'm constantly like, for instance, at Infocom this past year, we WAVIT gave out a scholarship to an amazing young lady. But I really took it upon myself, and it was a mission almost that I need to connect her with as many people as I possibly could and introduce her to all my AV friends and that sort of thing. But I love doing that, and so I really I think having all those really great connections in a time like COVID and in a time where I was like starting Wave It and starting BAM,
Right.
was so meaningful. I'm so grateful for that.
Yeah, yeah. I always talk about how great our industry is. That it's not like other industries that are super cutthroat and nobody wants to help. Everybody, if you're willing to go out and ask for help, or people are accessible and available and willing to help, and just I try to tell people who are just breaking into the space all the time, like, don't think somebody's out of reach. Like just go ahead and reach out to them. Like there's not a lot of big egos, a lot of characters, but not a lot of big egos.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. You couldn't have said it any better. I would agree with you 1,000%.
Let's talk about your background though. Like you get into marketing, right? Take some creativity. Like where does your creativity come from? Like, and by the way, like I love the name and the whole marketing behind, like, using the comic book BAM, type of thing. So
Yeah,
uh
yeah. We like to have fun with the brand. I don't know. My creativity, it's funny because, okay, so let me go back in time. So obviously I did insurance, probably the most boring thing you could probably do for marketing. It was good though. I really learned a lot. I really, that was a really educational experience being with that company for such a long time and rebranding and doing all the things that we did and creating mobile apps and, all that kind of stuff. So it was a really good opportunity. But even before that, the creativity has never sort of like stopped with me. Before I got into insurance, this is completely different. I was actually doing like floral design, which is so dumb and so weirdly different than everything I've ever done. And I did that for a long time too. I was, making wedding bouquets and, creating these large floral installations and stuff. But like, I've always had like that very creative side to me. But I've
mhm.
also got a very like analytical, scientific side to me as well. And I think marketing is a melding of all of those things, to be honest. As a marketer, we have to have creativity and we have to have vision and that sort of thing. And I definitely have that. But I also look at the numbers and I look at the stats and the analytics and the SEOs and all that kind of stuff that feeds into, you know, creating strategies and creating campaigns and things like that.
Yeah, marketing is definitely right. It's an art and a science, right?
It is.
So when your approach, is it like a 50-50 blend, or is it like, hey, like,
It depends on the client. So, with AV, what I've learned and digital signage is that so we work with a lot of manufacturers, but we've worked with, manufacturers reps and we've worked with content creation companies and we run this full spectrum. We work with integrators. And so there's not a segment of the industry that we really haven't touched at this point. But it's really individual. And I think that's the other thing that's really important that I've learned is that, a lot of marketing agencies are very cookie cutter. We'll do, your whole program, we'll do your social media, we'll do blogs for you, we'll manage your website. And it's very like cookie cutter. And we take a very more personalized approach. So when we start with a new client, there's a long period. And I always say, we're going to crawl, walk, then we're going to run.
mhm.
And they get this because I need to get to know what you're doing and what you're shooting for. And if your marketing currently or should line differently or be, strategically different from what you're currently doing. But I want to get to know a brand. I want to know a brand inside and out, what their strengths are, what the weaknesses are. We do a full brand and SWOT analysis. We look at everything. And then we, kind of, again, there's the science part. We analyze, everything that's going on. And then from there, we actually say, okay, here's what we're going to propose. And this is what we're suggesting based on what you're doing and what we think you need and how to improve your brand and improve your reputation, improve your traffic, whatever it is that their goals are. And that's the other thing. What are your goals? What, are you looking to launch a product? Are you looking to gain recognition? Are you looking for subject matter expert? What's the goal? What are the objectives here?
Yeah. So, like marketing's so multifaceted, right? And a lot of people think it's all right. I'm just going to do like a cold email campaign and call it a day, drip emails, whatever.
Hmm.
What, not to give away all your secrets, but like what works nowadays? Like we're all bombarded with so much spam and emails and AI tools that are just spamming everything and, LinkedIn messages and so forth. Like, what?
Yeah, oh gosh, and I get the vast share of those too. So
Yeah.
I, I I try to steer my clients away from doing stuff like that because I just don't think that that kind of stuff doesn't work. I
Right.
think bottom line for me and for what I think what I want my clients to really think about is being authentic, right? So, whatever their voice is, and I'm lucky I have BAM, right? Because I can be a superhero and kind of like take BAM to that kind of like status, right? And have some fun with my brand. So whatever your brand is, I think you capitalize and you optimize on those kinds of things and you want to have that authentic voice. So for us, at BAM, we talk about being your superhero in marketing. I talk about being part of my family. I really do think my clients are my family. I do think that they are my family. So I think, you have to like be authentic and be real about what you want your brand to evoke with clients. And so you plan according to that. So, if I want my clients to think I'm reliable and trustworthy and a great partner, I need to say those things, but I also need to deliver on those things, right? So it's kind of like, you have the capabilities of being reliable and trustworthy and a partner. Okay, great. Well, then let's say that in a way that is effective, right? And that can take on a multitude of different things, whether it's an email campaign, whether it's a personal sales call, whether it's, going to events that align with that strategy. So, we we'll make suggestions accordingly. Again,
Sure.
it's not cookie cutter. There's not a one-stop shop or a one
Right.
size fits all kind of thing for marketing.
100%. And you mentioned it's about getting that authentic story out there. Um, I always think of marketing as very much, storytelling, right? Like getting your personal story, your product story, or so forth out there. Um, when you think about storytelling and the way you guys use it in your approach, um, is there a certain like I guess what's the strategy of putting that story together? Like, besides saying, all right, this is what we want to get out there, but
Yeah.
you kind of have to build it, right? Almost like writing a story, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So for us, we start with the why. Well, let's say we're launching a new product. Why do they need it? What's in it for them? What are
Mhm.
they going to get out of it? Obviously, those are big things, right? I mean,
Right.
any product needs to address something, whether it's, you know, temporary solution or if it's a permanent solution, whatever that is, right? So we need to figure out what the why is first. Why do people need this? Why should they buy? Why do they want this, right? Because let's face it, you walk on the floor of any Infocom or any other show, you get those very ooh shiny bright moments, right? Everything's very, and it is. I've had the pleasure of taking new people to Infocom, my assistants and colleagues and stuff, and look at their eyes like just pulling out of their head because it's ooh bright shiny. But that's wonderful that it's a show stopping moment. But what's in it for the end user, right? What are they getting out of it? Is it that they're less of a headache? So we really again we plot our way through how that how that helps people, right? Where that solution fits in and why they might need it. And we also build that in terms of different buying personas, right? Is this a product that is geared towards an end user? What segment of an end user? We're talking like it's a higher ed project. Is it a product that is only used in corporate boardrooms? Where is that applicable, right? So based on a lot of that, then we sort of define, okay, we know the why, we've figured out the who, and now what is it that we need to tell them to entice them to buy that product, right? So I mean, product launches are multifaceted. We're talking from anything from PRs to teases in social media to, email campaigns to those buyer personas. Maybe there are a few campaigns,
Yeah,
targeted, segmented. But there's a definite, print ads. I mean, there's a multitude of different things that kind of go into any sort of like storytelling and narrative, right?
sure. So it's funny you mentioned the whole experience of going to your first InfoComm and then or bringing people to InfoComm and everybody walks around and sees all these like you know
Mhm.
mesmerizing, right? Video
Yes.
walls, and all these sound systems, and all this cool tech. Uh,
Yeah.
like I have an associate recruiter that works for me, and I took him to his first InfoComm 2 years ago, and he's like, "Oh, I didn't even realize this is like all our industry. Like, yeah, this stuff's everywhere." And so, I guess my bigger question is, as an industry, why aren't we good at marketing? I guess.
Oh, we're terrible at marketing it. It's interesting that you say that too. We don't market our industry very well, and it's interesting because on the WAVIT side, we're very much about outreach and wanting to get youth into the industry and to do different things and offer mentorship and internship and things that are sort of like pathways into AV and into the industry in general, right? So, but one of the things that we look at early on when we start thinking about like trying to do a mentorship program and intern and all these different things is why don't people know about the industry and that
Yeah,
it's so cool and to a fault. Like I don't know if you've seen this, and maybe it's just me, but when I go on LinkedIn and I'm seeing so and so's retired and so and so's retired and I'm retiring at the end of the year, all these different things, I'm thinking really like we're retiring a lot of our
yeah,
great people, but what are we doing to again pave the way into our industry? So I always think about that in terms of, boy, we're really, we're kind of retiring a lot of folks, but what are we doing? So to your point, we're not doing much. There's not a lot of programs out there that
yeah.
are focused on outreach and getting youth. And it's kind of funny because people came to an infocom that were again, a little wet behind the ears, didn't know what AB was, didn't know what digital signage was. And they came and saw those ooh, bright, shiny moments or what a sound system really should sound like, right? All these different audio experiences and spatial, whatever, right? But I think it would be a turning point. It'd be really, I mean, I saw my colleagues light up and go, oh my gosh, I've seen this, I've heard this somewhere, I've put the dots together. You
You,
know,
you know, and this has been going on for as long as I've been in AV, 25 plus.
forever,
Like
forever.
I remember when I was, I was more on the CDA side as an integrator, and
Mhm.
I went to the CD Awards, and I'm sitting there. We were pretty successful, so sitting at a table full of like industry leaders, and I was like the young gun, and it was everybody like self-congratulating themselves, right? Like giving awards to each other, and it was like a small little boys group of whatever. And I'm just sitting
Yeah.
there thinking to myself, and I'm like, if we went outside, and this was in Indianapolis where CDA is headquartered, if we went outside and stopped anyone randomly on the street, nobody would know what CDO was. And it's still
Yeah.
to this day probably the same thing with Avixa. Um, and yeah, that's why I really appreciate like your organizations and groups that you're starting because you're talking about reaching out and reaching to this community. It,
We have to do a better job with that. That's one thing that I'm really I will be pushing, you know, our organization to do that. There's a series of videos that Avixa did a few years back, and they're sizzle videos, really. But I use them all the time if I'm talking to somebody who wants to get into AV, or if we're doing a show that potentially is like an outreach kind of moment, because these videos, and they're so underutilized. If you look at how many views that they have, it's ridiculously low compared to other things that they have on their website.
yeah,
But these videos show how cool our industry is. It talks about being a system integrator, talks about doing immersive environments, and it shows you that, like, maybe this is a bad term, but like that sort of like tech sexy kind of like why people love being in this industry, right? I mean, we all
yeah,
hear it and feel it. these videos are so well done. I have to give Avixa credit for this because they're amazing. They're just
Yeah.
underutilized because I think if
Right.
somebody saw these, they'd be like, that's what AV is. That's what this industry is all about. It's mind blowing, you know?
It is, and it's an industry that was built, from passion, right? That the original founders of CD and Avixa were passionate about audio video and wanted to use the tech to improve the way people live their lives. And then, it's funny, like I used to talk about like how much fun I have because I'm dealing like my clients were high net worth individuals building, their dream homes, right? Like, and I get to give them all the toys, right? I'm not the plumber. I'm not the electrician who's going to give them a light switch. I'm giving them a lighting control system. I'm doing all the fun stuff. I'm giving the surround sound and
Exactly.
the home theaters. Like, I think, look, I think the biggest thing that this industry, and again, as a recruiter, and I can kind of see how careers progress, and like you go to college and you walk out with 300 grand in debt, and go get a cubicle job, or
Mhm.
you could go get your CTS, you know, and make six figures in a few years, right? Like and build your way up. So it's like the
Yeah.
fact that that's not being
Fun doing it.
what
I sit and have fun and do all these really cool projects doing it, right?
exactly.
All
And while you're having fun playing with cool tech, yeah. Like I don't know why this industry doesn't go into every single high school, trade school.
college. Yeah,
You know,
absolutely. You know, there are very few, we'll say like 80 101 kind of college courses out there. It's just a
none.
handful. And
Yeah,
that's sad because you could go to pretty much any college and get into IT
right.
very easily, right? There are IT courses at the wazoo at a multitude of different colleges, and pretty much anything you want to do, there's an IT. When
Yeah,
we talk about in the industry this, this collaboration and this synergy between AV and IT, and I'm not knocking that. Don't get me wrong. I think that there definitely is. You talk
yeah.
to anybody on the IT side, it's AV. It's one and the same. It's synonymous. We're just calling it different things, right?
Hmm.
And it's kind of interesting because we don't do a very good job. We don't have an AV 101,
Right.
type of thing
Yeah,
in colleges or tech schools that would be enticing, the
right.
youth.
Yeah, no, look, there's definitely programs out there that are trying, like I know there's that group out of Pace University and
Next level,
right, and then
those things are wonderful,
yeah,
wonderful.
yeah. And then, Prep Tech and there's these other groups and so forth. All great, just not enough. Everyone's got to chip in more, you know.
Yes, agreed. Yeah,
Yeah,
bring 5 friends next time you come to Infocom. That's what we want.
right, right.
You know?
Oh, exactly. Right. Why isn't and that's where I'm like going back to like Avixa and Cedia doing a better job of marketing. They should hire you, right? You should
I'm happy to help.
yeah.
You
Um
know, and honestly, one of the things when I started hiring, for BAM was I didn't want to necessarily hire from the industry. There's people in there already. I
mhm,
purposely was like, "You've never done AV before? Let me see if this is something you'd be interested in doing." Because again, as a marketing person, we can go anywhere. We can market anything, right? But I was very intentional in not hiring somebody that was already in the industry. None of my people came from AV. They're all
yeah,
from different sectors, but they love it now, and I don't know that they would also do anything different. So, it's very intentional because I
right.
did do want to build the industry.
Yeah, which is great because like if we're going to grow and expand, right? We got to start looking in different places, right?
Yeah.
And so let's talk about that, right? Like with WAVIT and Women's Council, like obviously you guys are looking to help, bring in more women into this industry. And what are the challenges? Like where are you guys? Well, first let's talk about some of the successes and the challenges as well.
Well, the successes are great, right? Because I'm lucky that I have that relationship as the former, chair, that I can still call upon a lot of folks at VIX and say, let's collaborate, wave it and VIXA and put together a scholarship or whatever we want to do. I'm really grateful for that relationship. And one of the things that WAVIT is very proud of is that we're very agnostic. We set this intentionally so that we are working with groups like Avixa, like Gals and Gear, like, Girls Who Code, and all these different sort of like organizations, because at the end of the day, we all are doing the same thing. We're all really after the same thing, bringing more women into the industry and helping forge better career paths for them. So, it's a very intentional collaboration that we do with a lot of these organizations. So, our successes have been that we started our mentorship program this year, and it's been going very, very well. We have a number of, you know, cohorts right now that are working together, and that program works well because there's no set time frame. So you can work for a little time with your mentor or mentee, or you can continue the relationship as long as it's needed. And that's kind of a beautiful thing, because I mean, as somebody who's always had a mentor and somebody in my life, um, you don't always need them, but it's nice that there's still that
Uh,
path, right, that you can
yeah,
still,
I
you
would
know
I would say you 100% do need them, right? Like it's um it's an unbelievable resource, and not to have one, especially with so many that are willing and able. It's funny, like again, through my seat as a recruiter and talking to people about their careers, I'm like, hey, why'd you move from here to here? Well, previous manager recruited me over here, and I followed them there, and um, yeah,
yes.
building your network. I think it's super critical for success in this space.
Absolutely. Yeah. Having a mentor has been probably one of the biggest benefits in my career. And when I was in insurance, we had mentors. Getting into AV, I immediately found mentors that, people that have been in the industry for quite a long time that could, help me navigate, because it's unlike anything else, right? So
Yeah.
that's really, again, a big part of what Waveit is doing is, matching up mentors and mentees. And, we've been in a way that is very, again, it may be a little bit on the manual side, and I'm okay with that. But we wanted to make sure that these couplings, if that makes sense, were geographically,
Yeah.
beneficial. It really doesn't help if somebody's on the East Coast versus West Coast, and you're trying to, to make time to have that mentor mentee relationship.
Right.
Sometimes mentees are looking for people in a specific sector. Hey, I really need somebody who's in, the engineering side of things that I
Mhm.
can bounce ideas off of. So we've intentionally matched people like that as well. So, there's a lot of different factors that go into sort of making these matches, but we certainly are doing our best to facilitate that. The other thing
Yeah.
that we've done, and that's been really a huge success, is our intern program. So we partnered with American Music and Sound, AMNS, a
Hmm.
few years back, and that's been going on like gangbusters. I believe they're on their fifth intern right now, and all but one have been hired within the, as
It's
they
great.
call it, their jam family. Their Jamily.
Yeah.
So it's been fantastic, and again, trying to, one by one, even, getting new folks into the industry is so important. And they,
Sure.
like me, have been very intentional about finding people that aren't necessarily in AV. They found folks that were DJing. They found, young women that were in music and doing different things to facilitate these internship
Yeah. Yeah.
jobs. So yeah,
Look,
those have been
yeah,
great.
that's great. That's great. And again, maybe I just view it, as somebody who's about to have three kids in college, and it's just like, man, if you could avoid those college tuitions and still come out
Oh,
with a successful,
yes.
six figure plus career, why not? Right.
Yeah.
But let's talk about, you started BAM, right? In the middle of, I want to kind of jump back to this because, and kind of come from a different angle, but during during COVID, right? Pretty big risk there, right?
It
Let's
was
talk.
huge.
Yeah. So let's talk about, taking risks professionally, and how they, might be scary, but how they pay off, and so forth. So tell your story a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think I mentioned, Hal was really the one that pushed me to go over the edge and to, put my feet in the the big pool of, starting a business. And it was very scary, to be honest. It was like, we have COVID going on, that we just, there was so many unknowns and so many unknown factors. And that alone was just really daunting. But at the same time, like starting a business, I'll be honest, I never in a million years thought I was going to start my own company. I was thought I'm going to work for the man, and it would have been totally fine with me. But I really can't see myself doing anything else, and I really don't know why I didn't
Right.
consider it earlier. But yeah, there's a lot of risk. I mean, and so much that goes into starting your own company, right? It's not just building a website and if you build it, they'll come. There's finding a great accountant and finding staff to help you facilitate things, and there's so
But
much that goes into starting a business. It's huge.
yeah, besides the nuts and bolts, it's also putting yourself out there. It's your personal brand, right?
Yeah,
You are
yeah.
banned. You are, those are
Oh
your
yeah,
initials.
those are
Uh,
my literally, yeah, and my brand, yeah.
yeah,
Take it very seriously, because you're right. I mean, like with anything, your brand is your word, right? It's your bond. It's what people perceive and what people get to know. Um, and I think what people learn when they start working with our company is that we're really all about taking care of our clients. That's why I do use the term family a lot. You see me, I'll hashtag it and things like that,
mhm,
because I do believe in that. I do believe that my clients are an extension of my family. We
right,
take care of them. We hold their hand through everything. Um, you know,
right. But you,
they always laugh. When I was going to say, they always laugh too, because when I'm talking with my clients, it's never your website. It's our website.
right,
It's our product launch. It's our social media channels. I
yeah,
don't take that lightly. I don't say that with
yeah. It's not cliche. I get it. Right.
it's
Because I'm the same way. When I'm writing emails to my clients, I use we, right? Like we need to do this.
same.
We need to do that. It's us. We're a team. We're
Yes,
a family. But let's talk about starting the business. And as a marketing person, now you got to market yourself.
yes.
You got to build your own personal brand. How was that different for you? What were it's funny because like I talk, obviously recruiting it, like I prep candidates on to go on interviews. I'm like, this is when you got to sell yourself. And like all these top salespeople have no problem selling a product or a service, but when it comes to themselves, they become very bashful and really uncomfortable. How was that for you?
I'm still uncomfortable pushing myself. I don't know if you ever get really comfortable with that. I do have a little bit of a hunter gatherer sales kind of mindedness to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's still I have a hard time tooting my own horn, and talking about those kind of like success stories. But you know, um, yeah, I created my brand. Went through. Oh man, I don't know. I'd have to look back at all my notes, but like the thought of like naming my company. What do knew what I was going to do? Marketing, PR. That was the easy part. Like I know what I could break that down to, and sort of in terms of like what services I could offer um, from my agency standpoint, right? But
Right.
like, what am I going to name this, and how am I going to promote this, and what do people know me for? And it's funny because as a women's council chair, there was one year that that wasn't COVID, that we got up on stage and they were talking about how I was like this heroine and this superhero figure, and that actually kind of like crossed over a little bit. And they would always say, "Well, she's like our Wonder Woman," and not that that's trademarked, and that's not. I can't take that name, right? But like that sort of like hero status kind of like made me start thinking. And then my initials were BAM, BAM.
Perfect.
I thought, well, that's kind of like crazy. Like I could literally use something that's superheroish. And so I started like again digging into what that could be, and how that would connotate from a marketing standpoint. And really that was the basis of everything, is like picking those sort of like nuggets that were character qualities that I may not have seen in myself, but I could certainly, you know, put that out there.
No, obviously it's been great and it's working well for you. But let's talk about personal branding, and how important it is for people in the industry. Like it's funny, my LinkedIn, and I know it's algorithm driven, but I always see the same 10 people, about
Yeah.
10 that are active, posting, putting themselves out there, creating content, and doing a good job. And obviously they're successful. And I'm wondering,
Mhm.
where are the other thousands of people? Like, why aren't they posting? Why aren't they building their personal brand? Like, why aren't they, doing
It's,
things? So
it's
let's talk
important.
about personal branding and its importance.
Yeah. I think, you know, again, sort of harkening back to me being looked at the time when I was the chair as some sort of like superwoman, right? Starting
Yeah.
all these groups and going around the world and, helping and doing all this stuff, right? And I get like where that kind of comes into play. And I think it's so important that it's funny because even that is like I said, I don't toot my horn very well. And that's probably one of the things that I don't do,
Right.
very well for myself. So promoting myself from a, personal branding standpoint takes me out of a comfort zone and I think that is true for a lot of people that, it's uncomfortable to say, yeah, I do this really, really well. This is why you should work with me or, you
Right.
know, watch my LinkedIn posts or whatever that is. Right. I think it's a comfort thing. I think we're
Yeah.
not comfortable talking about ourselves and what we bring to the table. And so I think one of the things that you have to think about is like just getting out of your proverbial box and putting yourself out there because those opportunities, if I wouldn't have put BAM out there in such a way and don't talk about the family and talk about being connected and being, somebody forced to reckon with in the industry, I would just be another agency. It wouldn't serve me right the way that it has. I certainly wouldn't have grown to where I'm at now and
Yeah.
continuing to grow. So I think you have to take yourself out of the box a bit and really think about what you have to offer and what you bring to the industry and how you make an impact. And that's what you need to key into.
Like it's one of the things that I like to say to people is it's like always take the advice that you give to others, right? Like you'd have no problem telling somebody else, hey, yeah, you should do this more, you should do that, or don't be afraid, don't do this. And then when it comes to you, like, oh no, no, I can't do that, right? So
Yeah, I can do that for myself.
right,
Yeah,
right,
no.
right. Take your own
Like, I
take
mean,
your own advice.
yeah, take the lead. You
Yeah.
know, I look at, I get thrown into Infocom with my first little stint in AV. Thank you so much. Like, thanks for dropping me in the deep end.
Right.
Honestly, I was grateful for that because had I been like just testing the waters and figuring it out, I think there almost has to be a sink or swim kind of mentality sometimes, right? Same thing. If Hal wouldn't have pushed me to start BAM, may not have. I may have just been waiting until I
Yeah.
found my next thing. You have to take the leap and take that risk for it to pay off sometimes, right? And
100%.
another thing that I learned along the way and through my mentor, actually through Corey, is like fail forward. So what if you fail? What if you do something, or what if you launch a product and it's doesn't pan out for whatever reason, or you start a campaign and it doesn't work, whatever that is. But fail forward, learn from it, and move on. Don't get stuck in the mire. People are going to fail. We're human. We're supposed to. You know.
No, nobody's perfect. Nobody's never failed once. Like the only real failure is if you don't learn and get better from it, right? So it's
Repeat that mistake and do it 100 times. That's a failure. Absolutely.
yeah. You mean like it's one of those things that I try to pull out of candidates is like, hey, like what are your lessons learned, right? Like
Yes.
you have to be able to talk about your strengths and your weaknesses, and one of the best ways to do that is to talk about, hey, look, I made these mistakes, I learned from them. Here's how I improved, and
Yeah.
um, personal branding, if you were going to recommend to industry members, people out there that just are like, hey, a little shy, bashful, you know, like I don't think branding just has to be your successes. I think sometimes it could just be, who you are and your authentic self, right? What are some of the recommendations that you could give people to do to kind of get their brand and out there a little bit more?
Yeah. Look at those people in our industry, or maybe not even just in our industry, but look at those like influencers that you resonate with, right? So for me, I look at people like Jennifer Weaver, right?
Hmm.
She's always talking about being, the AB shoe goddess and sneakerheads and all that kind of stuff. And that works for her because she has owned that brand and it it ties back to everything that she's doing. I look at folks like Alicia Hickman, she's
Yeah.
amazing. Her brand is her. Um, and I look at those sort of like influential people and not to copy them, that they're their own people. And
Yeah.
that's the authenticity of both of them. But I look at like how they're doing what they're doing and how often are they posting and how are they talking about what they're doing and their successes and what their why is, and how can we look at that and somehow also bring that into our own brands, right? So I look at the things like that, and I would advise others to look at folks that you're watching on,
Yeah.
Instagram and TikTok and all these different things, these influencers that are resonate with you, and how are they using their personal brand to benefit? And that's what I would key into.
Yeah. So this is actually my 20th episode, right, of this podcast, and the crazy thing is, going through all of them. Excuse me. The clips that I've posted on LinkedIn that I've gotten the biggest response to is people talking about just being themselves, being authentic, not being afraid to put themselves out there. Like what we talked about earlier, like this industry is full of characters, right?
Oh
Like every,
gosh.
right. So just put yourself out there. There's really nothing to be afraid of. And again, there's things that I post and I get no likes on it, and I'm like, why doesn't anyone like it? I mean, it's all right. The next one will be better.
I think to your point, there was an instance when I was in a manufacturer and I was at Infocom, and there was a gentleman that was approaching our booth, and our thing was obviously we want to engage and get those leads and to
Right.
people, right? And everybody that was in the booth at the time looked at this gentleman because he was dressed very bohemian, very had like a purple mohawk, kind of looked very crazy, right?
Yeah.
And I think outwardly people went, I'm not touching that one with a 10-foot pole, right? And to my, and I was like, I'll go talk to him. Well, I will talk to anybody. I have no problem with that. I tend to be a bit more extroverted than introverted. So I thought, no, I'll do this. I love to meet people. I always find a way that I can find a commonality, right? So I went up and I started chatting with this gentleman, and we come to find out he was doing a huge project, multi-million-dollar project. And I thought to myself, you dummies, this could have been an amazing lead for any of you. And because
Right.
you take down your guard and speak to somebody who looked a little different than you lost a potentially multi-million-dollar deal, because you were just too closed off. And I think that's the big thing too, is you got to be open to talking to anybody, to connecting with anybody, you know.
Yeah, and sometimes it's not them, but their best friend, right? Right? You never know where that big lead is going to come from.
Truthfully, another show that I was at, I will never forget this. It was a DSE show. And again, my colleagues had sort of like left to go have lunch or something. And it was myself and one other person in the booth. And I remember, we had this battery operated kiosk that we were like moving around the booth just to, attract people to take a look at this thing. Big and clunky, wasn't anything, like what we can see now that's like cool and slick and battery operated. It was a very clunky thing. And so I was, moving it around the booth and doing the spiel. And this gentleman comes up and he's looking at it. He's like, this is a game changer. This is amazing. And I was like, yeah, sure. It's amazing. So,
Right.
and I give him the 30-second little elevator pitch. And he's like looking at his phone the whole time. And he's like, what booth number are you? I need to get my team over here. And I thought, oh, okay, well, this is kind of cool. Tell him the booth number. I haven't looked at his badge. I haven't looked at anything at this point. I'm just having a conversation with the gentleman. Next thing
Right.
I know, there's like 20 people in the booth. No kidding. 20 people. And they're all like on their phones and like taking pictures of the thing. They all work for Nike.
Yeah.
And I
Awesome.
went,
Yeah.
shit, where were you guys? Why weren't you in the booth? This is another huge project that we're going to end up in our laps. And it was the start of working with them for the company too. So it was pretty cool.
Yeah. I had a client, when we were doing the home automation business,
Mhm.
comes up to me at like a home and garden show where we had a booth. And I was this
Mhm.
elderly, rural type guy, very, very simple. And he's got this homely wife next to him. They're asking me all these questions about like technology. And I'm like, oh gosh, like this guy's,
Yeah.
I'm going to try to explain tech and, totally giving out the vibe of a tire kicker, but like, somebody who, I think he spent like 250 grand with us, like, building his $10 million house, just, you never know. So,
Show you never know. You know.
right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's kind of wrap up with a couple quick rapid fire questions. Maybe we can have some fun with this. But hey, most creative city you've ever visited?
Oh, New Orleans,
New Orleans.
definitely. Great museums, great vibe, great culture. Yeah, New Orleans, definitely.
I used to live there. I spent 10 years
Oh,
in
you
New Orleans.
did?
Yeah, love that
I
city.
wasn't just doing that to.
Yeah, no, it's the best.
Oh, it really is. Yeah.
If you could promote or market any product or brand, even outside of AV, what would it be?
Oh my gosh. That's a great question.
Who's that dream client?
Oh man, Dream Climate and AV would be anybody in digital signage. I love that sector, especially of our industry,
Yeah.
LED manufacturers, digital signage manufacturers. I live and breathe that. So it'd probably be, I don't know, it'd either be like a sports team that's done like a really cool installation or some sort of like, I don't know, sneaker company or something like that would be a lot of fun. Those Nikes, yeah, that would be fun to work for.
Got it. What's the one book or resource everyone should read?
Oh man, so many. I think, I think Purple Cow for me kind of is one of my favorites, only because I use that kind of like thought so many times in marketing, the differentiator
Hmm.
moments, that we
Right.
use to make people stand out.
All right. And then any famous creative person, living or historical, you'd love to collaborate with.
Oh, this is gonna sound so silly, but Prince, he's gone way too soon. Oh my gosh, that man. He was an artist that, in my teen years, I wanted to see him in concert so badly. And my parents were like, no, he's the devil. Not the devil, but like they were just not too
Right.
keen on his music or his vibe or whatever. And I always like, I just, as a teenager, I hated that because, I loved him and I thought his music was so amazing. I still do, obviously. And I never did get to see him in concert. And that's one thing that I would absolutely have loved to have gotten a chance. So,
It's funny you mentioned Prince because like kind of extends into our industry. Like, the quirkier, the stranger the people are, the more brilliant like every brilliant person I know is really quirky and weird.
big quirky.
Right.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
Cool. So let's start wrapping up. I guess tell the listeners how they can get a hold of you.
Sure. Easy. So BAM marketing is bammarketingpr.com. I'm on the socials individually, personally as AV Brandy on Twitter and Brandy Alvarado Miranda on LinkedIn. And in terms of the WAVIT, you can find WAVIT at womeninavit.org or on social as such.
Gotcha. Um, Great. I appreciate you, joining me today. It's been a great conversation. I think that the work you're doing, besides your firm, but obviously with the Women's Council and Wave It, is really impactful and needed. Um, Thank you for that. Thank you for all your efforts, and hopefully some of the listeners will reach out and not just hopefully contact and collaborate in multiple ways with you. So.
Always super accessible. Happy to partner with anybody and chat with anybody.
Yeah. So to the listeners, if you're still here, thank you. We appreciate you listening and hit that like, subscribe, share with a friend or a colleague. And until next week, good luck with your hunts.